Fantastic. Well, welcome to the 2015 SummerWords keynote event. It is a wonderful evening that we have in store for you. So before we get started, I wanted to just take a moment and recognize and to thank a few people who are with us this evening. And I wanted to begin by one of our past presidents of the college, Marie Smith, who's with us. Thank you. We also have a number of members from our foundation board who are with us tonight. If you would raise your hands or do a quick stand-up, sit-down. Thank you for your support. Your time and your energy for the college and our students is appreciated. We also have Kirsten Dubray and Debbie Hildred who are with our foundation who are helping us out this evening, so thank them. I wanted to take a moment and express my appreciation for one key sponsor this evening, the Albert and Elaine Borchardt Foundation. It's without their generous support that SummerWords would not exist. So please join me in thanking the Borchardt Foundation. You know, and it's extremely important that the SummerWords does exist, as well as many other events focused on the arts, literature, and the humanities, that they're available to our community and our students. And I was talking to Carolyn as we were driving to the college, and we were talking about kind of the threats to our educational system and where the focus is these days. And when you consider our focus on skills training to remain competitive in a global society and the emphasis there, when you think about the frenetic pace of change that technology has introduced, when you think about the unprecedented amount of information that's available, often very partisan information, that seems to be spoon-fed to our society in ways that it hasn't been before, the threat to a liberal education has never been greater. But I'll tell you, it's ironically, liberal education has never been more important. The arts, the humanities, right? Writing, literature. It's in these times that we're in right now that our ability, our society's ability, our community's ability to think critically and examine our collective decisions, our behaviors, to consider alternative perspectives, way of being, way of looking at the world, and bringing meaning to our past experiences all these things serve to move our society forward, and forward with greater compassion and justice. And so as I was getting ready for this, just to introduce just SummerWords keynote tonight, I was looking through Carolyn's anthology, Against Forgetting, the 20th Century Poetry of Witness. And she quotes Bertolt Brecht in this, and I wanted to read this to you because I think it sums up why a liberal education is so important. It says, "In the dark times, will there also be singing? Yes, there will also be singing about the dark times." So events like SummerWords move us in this direction, in a direction of being able to sing about the dark times, and it is unbelievably rare for a community college to offer these events. I can't tell you how fortunate are we to have faculty who understand the importance of and are committed to ensuring today's students in the community possess such a strong and broad liberal education. And no stronger does this vision and commitment exist than in the English and the creative writing faculty here at American River College. And so if you are one of the faculty members in the English department, would you please stand? So I know you didn't come here to listen to me talk, so I'm going to end here by recognizing two ARC creative writing faculty who are the inspiration and literally the blood, sweat, and tears behind this event, and that is Professor Michael Spurgeon and Christian Kiefer. Please stand, gentlemen. So thank you for being with us tonight, and it's now my pleasure to introduce Harold Schneider.
Thank you very much, Dr. Greene. Dear audience, we're mighty pleased to have you all here with us on our campus this evening, and welcome to American River, Carolyn. You know, I've read all of her poetry in the last 4 months, and I think the best way to introduce her would just be to read all her poetry to you. But I think Dr. Greene would come back on stage and fire me. So I have a briefer introduction. As a community college, we hope to make our activities available for our mostly working students And for 4 years, we've done so with low fees and scholarships to SummerWords, largely due to our sponsors. So thank you again to the Albert and Elaine Borchardt Foundation for their ongoing support. Also to the American River College Foundation, to Amador Vintners, Taylor's Market, and Uriah Faber. So that name might be familiar to some of you, the Sacramento Kid, the MMA fighter. I almost said MFA fighter. If he's here tonight, I'm going to take him down. I'll thank him first for the patronage, but in an interview, Carolyn Forchè quotes the poet Rainer Maria Rilke. Poetry is the natural prayer of the human soul. And she adds, writing and reading poetry enable us to sustain and expand our capacity for contemplation, a capacity that can lead to empathy, traits eroded by modern life. Tonight, we will have our capacities for contemplation examined and expanded by someone admired internationally. First of all, for her generous humanity, her graciousness, her sweet comedy, as much as for her unsurpassed gifts as one of the world's premier poets. Just 27 years old in 1978, she traveled on a Guggenheim Fellowship to El Salvador to study Spanish and to write and to translate poetry. But eventually, as a journalist and human rights activist there, she reported to Amnesty International. In El Salvador, she witnessed the poverty of the peasants, the alarming ill health of the children, the brutality of the regime. This was a time of death squads, missing people, and the torture of dissidents. She says she sometimes drove with a gun on her lap. Many poems in her second collection, The Country Between Us, record those events. We might say preserve those events. In the early 1980s, she shared her concerns for the welfare of Central American citizens in presentations around the United States. Her own witnessing continued when in 1984, she married the esteemed Time magazine photographer and correspondent Harry Madison and accompanied him on assignments in Nicaragua, El Salvador, Lebanon, the West Bank, and South Africa during apartheid. While in Beirut, under shell fire, winter of 83-84, she reported a series of news documentaries for NPR's All Things Considered. She writes, when poets bear witness to historical events, everyone they tell becomes a witness too. Everyone they tell also becomes responsible for what they have heard and what they know now. Her list of publications and honors would occupy us for the entire hour. I'd love that, actually. It would be a thrilling hour, but I'll highlight just 3. With several books of translation and 4 books of her own poetry, Carolyn's first book of her own poetry, Gathering the Tribes, received the Yale Younger Poets Award, our country's most prestigious award for a first book of poems. And I still think of you as a younger poet. She compiled and edited 2 towering anthologies of the poems of witness. The first, published in 1993, is Against Forgetting, 20th Century Poetry of Witness. Poems by 150 poets gathered over a decade from Latin America, the United States, the Middle East, the Far East, South Africa, and Europe, including from survivors of the Holocaust. Just days ago, Carolyn was announced as a finalist for the 2016 Neustadt International Prize for Literature. This prize is the most prestigious international literary award given in the United States, often cited as America's Nobel for its reputation as a lead-up to the Swedish Academy's annual selection. Or as Christian Kiefer would say, that's some award. Forthcoming books include a book of essays, a fifth collection of her own poems, In the Lateness of the World, and a memoir, The Horse on Our Balcony. Really? Oh, okay. Next year, when I read the memoir, I'd like you all to come back so I can reintroduce her. She's the Lannan Visiting Professor of Poetry and Professor of English at Georgetown University in Washington. If you want to see her, her office hours are Tuesdays 11 to noon and by appointment. So let's all show up there Tuesday. To the extent that poetry is music for the human voice, as we are about to hear, Carolyn's voice is a Slavic viola wedded to the minor keys. Certainly the voice of her Czech grandmother moves like a large-legged angel of history through each of her volumes. When we read her exquisitely rendered poems in a stunning array of styles on a wide range of themes, often we see the world as if it's the last moment of seeing the world. But then somehow the next moment is there, has been there all along underfoot. Some of you know that we've enjoyed the company of two poets laureate of America on this stage, keynote evenings of SummerWords, the late Philip Levine and last year Rita Dove. Tonight, with the rarely used power invested in me as professor of English at American River, I wish to proclaim Carolyn Forchè as our personal poet laureate of the world. The poems in her collections by others and her own poems cross borders. They steal across borders. They are the conscience of the world. Please welcome Carolyn Forchè.
I'm going to take Harold with me everywhere now so that he can introduce me. I'm very happy to be here at American River for the first time and with SummerWords. And it seems like a really wonderful, rich, incredible festival. So thank you for having me this evening for this. And do not forget to have Hickory Hank's barbecue after. We'll all be there. I'd like to open with a kind of invocation poem. I love lighthouses, and wherever there are lighthouses, I go see them. There are other people like me who also go see lighthouses. The problem is you always want to be alone with the lighthouse. And because there are so many people who like them, when you hike out the promontory to the lighthouse, there are other people walking around. So you give each other looks like, get away from my lighthouse, go home now. But I was taken to one in Ireland that is called the Hook Lighthouse. It's in County Wexford on the Irish Sea. And it's right across the water from Crook Lighthouse. So now we have maybe an understanding of where we got by hook or by crook, because I never knew that, but now we do. This poem has a little bit of the history of how lighthouses were lit, but it isn't really about that. The Light Keeper, a night without ships, foghorns calling into walled cloud, and you, still alive, drawn to the light, as if it were a fire kept by monks. Darkness once crusted with stars, but now death dark as you sail inward. Through wild gorse and sea wrack, through heather and torn wool you ran, pulling me by the hand so I might see this for once in my life. The spin and spin of light, the whirring of it. Light in search of the lost, there, since the era of fire, era of candles and hollow wick lamps, whale oil and solid wick, colza and lard, kerosene and carbide, the signal fires lighted on this perilous coast in the Tower of Hook. You say to me, stay awake. Be like the lens maker who died with his lungs full of glass. Be the yew in blossom when bees swarm. Be their amber cathedral, and even the ghosts of Cistercians will be kind to you. In a certain light, as after rain, in pearled clouds, or the water beyond, seen or sensed water, sea or lake, you would stop still and gaze out for a long time. Also when fireflies opened and closed in the pines, and a star appeared, our only heaven. You taught me to live like this, that after death, it would be as it was before we were born. Nothing to be afraid, nothing but happiness, as unbearable as the dread from which it comes. Go toward the light always. Be without ships. Thank you. Thank you. I am going to speak a little bit about my grandmother, Anna, from former Czechoslovakia, born in the 19th century. She left us when I was 18 years old in 1968. Don't do the math. She wore little wire rim glasses and babushkas, and she wore silk house dresses, and I think she was trying to recreate the old country in this one. She spoke a lot of Eastern and Central European languages. Her English wasn't very good, so she would make things up if she didn't know the word for something. She called a colander a macaroni stop, water go ahead. So she called me piscala, which is, well, you'll see maybe in another poem, but it means chatterbox or little bird that sings too much. But she would say, piscala, go get me this macaroni, stop, water, go ahead. So this is how one can begin to invent with language, I suppose. I was born in Detroit, and it had a fancier name for the French Canadians. It sort of sounds nice, this fancy name. It's in the poem. And my history, my early history, this is the poem called Early Life. Anna has to have a poem in every book, you see. I mean, I feel her behind me sometimes when I'm writing, and if I haven't written a poem for her yet, she says, I want to be in the book. She has a rolling pin in her hand, so this goes. So I do it. Okay, Early Life. In Le de Toi du Le Carrier, 5 years after the end of the war, I was born. My father's naval uniform hung among our coats, and his white cap, flung into the sea at war's end, still then floated on the waves there. My father built a house for us, working in the dark after his factory shift. One night, a long-buried woman appeared, all fog and bones, passing through a wall he'd yet to finish. Later, we hung a mirror there, and from time to time, the fog woman stood behind the mirror looking out. Beneath a nearby house, there was a cellar where escaping slaves once were hidden. An underground railroad carried them through a tunnel beneath the fields. In the mornings, the fields hum their readiness. In the orchard, apples and apricots hid in the trees. In the garden, sudden red cabbage, blue-leaved lilies, endive and wandering mint. Over the field crawled squash vine and blossom until a dark row of berry canes stood in a cloud of bees and lettuces opened in watery light. When Anna was with us, pillows of bread rose in bowls and soup boiled the window's blind. Anna was from the old country. This was the new one. Many sentences began with "during the war." "Be quiet now," they said, in voices like birches in snow. They began their stories when the war ended. Nuns led us to school, walking 2 by 2 in black capes and veils over the ice toward Our Lady of Sorrows. After school, we ironed altar linens. In spring, daffodils called like geese from the ditches. Flocks of laundry pinned to the sky flew forth. Behind us, there was a house of paper dipped in tar, a hillock of liquor bottles, a smaller house, like a doll's house, for the flies. We are not poor. Our house is of brick. Our mother owns a sewing machine, and we are given oranges at Christmas. Thank you. I have 2 poems for one of your California poets. He announced himself in my first workshop in upstate New York one summer as, "My name is Ileya Kaminsky. I am from Odessa, former Soviet Union. I write poetry for God." And then he sat down. He's the only person who stood to introduce himself. And Ileya Kaminsky has a beautiful book called Dancing in Odessa. I taught him for some years, and now ever since then he's been teaching me. I took him back to Ukraine in 2004. And that we also went to St. Petersburg because that's where the great poets of the Silver Age of Russia lived and where their houses still are. And we had to go visit the shrines of the silver poets. So there's a little town not far from St. Petersburg called Tsarsky Selo. Tsarsky Selo is the summer palace of the czars. It's kind of a summer resort for the czars in those times. And Anna Akhmatova, the great Russian poet of the 20th century, spent her summers there when she was young. Also, Alexander Pushkin went to school there, and the school is now called the Pushkin Lycée. So we went there. This is for Ileya at Tsarsky Selo. We stand in the casement window of Pushkin's Lycée. These are the desks where Pushkin wrote, his chalkboards, his astrolabe. Snow falls from here into the past and vanishes on golden minarets. Snow recedes from the birches. A lesson writes itself in winter chalk. On the day Michelangelo died in Rome, Galileo was born in Pisa. Isaac Newton was born the year Galileo died. When they searched for the poet Kabir, they found nothing beneath his shroud but a sprig of jasmine. Man is like the statue, whispering about the marble chiseled from his mouth. You are the guardian of this statue, standing in your silent world. The year Isaac Newton died, there was a barn fire in a puppet show. Kabir says, all corpses go to the same place, and the world has fallen in love with a dream. This life is not the same as your other life. We are here now in one of the shrines of the silver poets. You are one of the silver. The snow is a white peacock in a Russian poem. And the other is called Exile. He was from Odessa, which was a city built all at once under the orders of Catherine the Great. It's built of limestone, which was the stone available, has lots of fossils in it. It was excavated from the shores of the Black Sea. It faces the Black Sea. Behind it is the Russian steppe. And Ileya fled there in 1973. Jews were persecuted in Ukraine. The family finally gave up and came to the United States. They started in the United States. He said the first city he saw was at night driving in the car. It was Rochester, New York, and he thought there'd been a nuclear war. And I said, why, Ileya? Why did you think that? And he said, there was nobody on the streets. It was completely empty. And he thought that would what would happen if there was a nuclear war. So I said, no, that's just American towns at night. People go to bed, you know. It's not like in Ukraine. So this is his poem, Exile. The city of your childhood rises between steppe and sea, wheat and light. White with the dust of cockle shells, stargazers, and bones of pipefish. City of limestone soft enough to cut with a hatchet. Where the sea unfurls and acacias brought by Greeks on their ships turn white in summer. So yes, you remember, this is the city you lost. City of smugglers and violinists, chess players and monkeys, an opera house, a madhouse, a ghost church with wind for its choir, where two things were esteemed, literature and ships, poetry and the sea. If you return now, it will not be as a being visible to others, and when you walk past, it will not be as if a man had passed, but as if someone had remembered something long forgotten and wondered why. If you return, your father will be alive to prepare for you his mint cucumber soup or give you the little sweet called bird's milk. And after hours of looking with him for his sandals lost near the sea, you visit again together the amusement park where your ancestors are buried, and then go home to the apartment house built by German prisoners of war, to whom your father gave bread, which you remember surprised you. You take the tram to a stop where it is no longer possible to get off, and he walks with you until he vanishes, still holding in his own your invisible hand. Thank you. So the last poem in this sequence I would like to read to you is called The Lost Suitcase. This is about another poet, Daniel Simko. Daniel Simko, like my family, we were from former Czechoslovakia. We were from a little village, Bardiev, not far from Bratislava. And I met him in Iowa City at a party after a poetry reading. And we sat on the couch, and he didn't speak English very well yet then. And it was with an accent. And I picked up the accent, and I said, "Where are you from?" He said, "Europe." I said, he was very, smoking a cigarette. And I said, "Well, where in Europe?" He said, "Oh, Central Europe." Where? He said, "Czechoslovakia." It was still Czechoslovakia then. I said, "Where in Czechoslovakia?" He said, "Tatra Mountains." I said, "Where?" And he said, "Bardiev." town called Bardiev. So then I said, my grandparents are from Bardiev. That started our friendship. He was a really close friend of my whole family, and then he became a librarian after he got his MFA. It was a really good thing for an MFA person to do, because you get lost up in the stacks of the New York Public Library. You're surrounded by books. Nobody's bothering you. You have a job, you know. So it was really nice for him. But he was a great, great guy, and he died prematurely in a hospital of septicemia when he was only 45 years old. And he would never send his poems out. I couldn't persuade him to send them out anywhere. They weren't finished. They weren't ready, you know. He had to write more. They weren't good enough. So after he died, I went to his apartment, took all the poems, and got them published in a book called The Arrival. It's a four-way book, and it's really wonderful, called The Arrival by Daniel Simcoe. Anyway, this is a poem I wrote for him because after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the Velvet Revolution in Czechoslovakia, he and I went there. I wanted to find my family. He wanted to get his jazz records and books from the attic where he had left them 22 years earlier. And I said, Daniel, there was no windows in that attic. You know, the jazz records aren't going to have held up too well. We went, they didn't, but we decided we wanted to drive, we wanted to go to Vienna and drive across the bridge and into Slovakia. And Daniel was a chain smoker. And Daniel had 2 suitcases with him, and one of them was his clothing. And this is what was the other one. And all through the trip, I never heard the end of this, okay? So this is called The Lost Suitcase. So it was with a suitcase left in front of the hotel. Cinched, broken locked, papered with world ports, carrying what mattered until then. When turning your back to cup a match, it was taken. And the thief, expecting valuables, instead found books written between wars, gold attic light, mechanical birds singing, and the chronicle of your country's final hours. What, by means of notes, you hoped to become. A noun on paper, paper dark with nouns. Swallows darting through a basilica, your hands up in smoke. A cloud about to open over the city, pillows breathing shallowly where you had lain. A ghost in a hospital gown. And here, your voice, principled, tender, soughing through a fence woven with pine boughs. Writing is older than glass, but younger than music. Older than clocks or porcelain, but younger than rope. Dear one who even in speaking is silent, for years I have searched, usually while asleep. When I have found the suitcase open, collecting snow, still holding your vade-mecum of the infinite, your dictionary of the no longer spoken, a commonplace of wounds casually inflicted, and the slender ledger of truly heroic acts. Gone is your atlas of countries unmarked by war. Absent your manual for the preservation of ours. The incunabulum is lost, both your earliest book and a hatching place for your mechanical birds, but the collection of aperçus having to do with light laying its eggs in your eyes was found, along with the prophecy that all mass murders were early omens. In an antique bookshop, I found your catechism of atrophied faiths. So I lay you to rest without your psalter nor the monograph wherein you state your most unequivocal and hard-won proposition, that everything must happen, but to whom doesn't matter. Here are your books, as if they were burning. Be near now, and wake to tell me who you were. Okay. Okay, thank you. You know, well, I was in El Salvador between January 4th, 1978 and March 16th, 1980. I left El Salvador at the behest of Monsignor Oscar Romero, Archbishop of San Salvador. He was assassinated a week later while he was saying Mass, and last week or so he was beatified in San Salvador. I'm going to read 2 poems from the period of time there, and then a new poem that emerged a long time later. The Visitor. In Spanish, he whispers, "There is no time left." It is the sound of scythes arcing in wheat, the ache of some field song in Salvador. The wind along the prison, cautious as Francisco's hands on the inside, touching the walls as he walks. It is his wife's breath slipping into his cell each night, while he imagines his hand to be hers. It is a small country. There is nothing one man will not do to another. This is a documentary poem. It has an obscenity in it, according to the Federal Communication Commission. I think there are 2 obscenities in it, maybe more, but so I will read now to you this poem. The Colonel. What you have heard is true. I was in his house. His wife carried a tray of coffee and sugar. His daughter filed her nails. His son went out for the night. There were daily papers, pet dogs, a pistol on the cushion beside him. The moon swung bare on its black cord over the house. On the television was a cop show. It was in English. Broken bottles were embedded in the walls around the house to scoop the kneecaps from a man's legs or cut his hands to lace. On the windows, there were gratings like those in liquor stores. We had dinner, rack of lamb, good wine. A gold bell was on the table for calling the maid. The maid brought green mangoes, salt, a type of bread. I was asked how I enjoyed the country. There was a brief commercial in Spanish. His wife took everything away. There was some talk then of how difficult it had become to govern. The parrot said hello on the terrace. The colonel told it to shut up and pushed himself from the table. My friend said to me with his eyes, "Say nothing." The colonel returned with a sack used to bring groceries home. He spilled many human ears on the table. They were like dried peach halves. There is no other way to say this. He took one of them in his hands, shook it in our faces, dropped it into a water glass. It came alive there. I am tired of fooling around, he said. As for the rights of anyone, tell your people they can go themselves. He swept the ears to the floor with his arm and held the last of his wine in the air. Something for your poetry, no? He said. Some of the ears on the floor caught this scrap of his voice. Some of the ears on the floor were pressed to the ground. May 1978. Thank you. So, okay. This next one, the friend in the poem. The friend says to me with his eyes say nothing. I never gave his name for a lot of reasons, especially during the war. His name was Leonard Gomez Vidas. He was the nephew of the poet Claribel Alegria, whom I had translated. And that translation work is what got me into all of this in the first place. But Leonel Gomez Vidas was my mentor. He saved my life a couple of times. He was my guide and my teacher. He was exasperating. He was many things. He's the star of my memoir, which is now titled What You Have Heard Is True, after the first sentence in the Colonel poem. But Leonel Gomez Vidas died on Thanksgiving Eve 2009. I had just been back in San Salvador in his house the week before for the commemoration of the deaths of the Jesuit priests, their housekeeper and her daughter. They were killed in '89. So we went to the commemoration 20 years later. And then Leonel had 5 heart attacks in a hospital emergency room on Thanksgiving Eve, what was Thanksgiving in the US. I was home at the time, and a few days later, I went back to Salvador to scatter his ashes on the volcano Huazapa, where most of the war was fought. A lot of the war was fought. After he died, everything rushed again back inside me. I mean, everything welled up, and I hadn't written about El Salvador in years, and a long time, 30 years, maybe more. And suddenly this one, we used to hunt for bodies, search for bodies that match descriptions of missing persons or photographs of missing persons. There were various places where bodies would be dumped who were killed by death squads in that time. And there was this one girl that I never forgot, and I couldn't get her out of my mind. And I sometimes dreamed about her off and on over those 30 years. So this is the poem that came after Leonel died. His voice is in it a little bit. He talks. He tells me what he wants me to bring to Salvador and things like that. So you'll hear him. The ghost of heaven. Sleep to sleep through 30 years of night. A child, herself with the child, for whom we searched. Through here or there, amidst bones still sleeved and trousered, a spine picked clean, a paint can, a skull with hair. Night to night, child, walking toward me through burning maze, over the clean bones of those whose flesh was lifted by zopilotes into heaven. So that is how we ascend, in the clawed feet of fallen angels, to be assembled again in the workrooms of the clouds. She rose from where they found her, lying not far from a water urn, leaving herself behind on the ground, where they found her holding her arms before her as if she were asleep. Blue smoke rising from corn cribs, the flap of wings. On the walls of the city streets, a plague of initials. Walking through a fire-lit river to a burning house. Dead singer sewing machine and piece of dress. Outside a cashew tree wept blackened cashews over lamina. Outside, paper fireflies rose to the stars. Bring penicillin if you can, you said. Surgical tape, a wet stone, mosquito repellent, but not the aerosol kind. Especially bring a syringe for sucking phlegm, a knife, wooden sticks, a clamp, and plastic bags. You will also need a bottle of cloud for anesthesia, to sleep like the flight of a crane through colorless dreams. When a leech opens your flesh, it leaves a small volcano. Always pour turpentine over your hair before going to sleep. Such experiences as these are forgotten before memory intrudes. The girl was found. Don't say this. With a man's severed head stuffed into her where a child would have been. No one knew who the man was. Another of the dead. So they had not, after all, killed a pregnant girl. that sound in the brush? A settling of wind in sorghum. If they capture you, talk. Talk, please. Yes, you heard me the first time. You will be asked who you are. Eventually, we are all asked who we are. All who come into the world, all who come into the world are sent. Open your curtain of spirit. Okay, thank you. Thank you. This is a letter to the city under siege. It's about the siege of Sarajevo. A friend poet, Semezden Mehmedinovic, was inside that city during the siege. And the people starved largely, and snipers fired upon them for a long time. Many of you are old enough to remember that. And he's now here in the United States. He came into exile here from that war. And I should tell you, in case, because you're hearing the poem for the first time, it might not be clear. The people actually managed to dig a tunnel from the city under the airport runway to escape the city. They used this tunnel to bring supplies into the city. It was never found during the siege. Letter to a city under siege. Turning the pages of the book you have lent me of your wounded city. Reading the braille on its walls. Walking beneath ghost chestnuts. Past fires that turned the bullet-shattered windows bronze. Flaring an instant without warming the fallen houses where you sleep without water or light. A biscuit tin between you. Or later, in the cafe ruins, you discuss all night the burnt literature borrowed from a library where all books met with despair. I wanted to give your notes back to you, to be printed in another language, not yours or mine, but a tongue understood by children who make bulletproof vests out of cardboard. We will then lie down in the cemetery where violets grew in your childhood, before snipers fired on the city using gravestones for cover. Friend, absent one, I can tell you that your tunnel is still there. Mud-walled and hollowed of earth, dug for smuggling oranges into the city. Oranges bright as winter moons by the barrow load. So let's walk further up the street to the hill where one is able to see the city woven in fog, roofs filled with sky, uprooted bridges, and a shop window where a shard of glass hangs over the spine of a book. The library burns on page 60, as it burns in all the newspapers of the world. And the clopping of horses' hooves isn't the sound of clopping horses. From here, a dog finds his way through snow with a human bone. And what else? What more? Even clocks have run out of time. But, my good friend, the tunnel. There is still a tunnel for oranges. This is brand new. This is the second time I've read it. The first time was 2 nights ago, a night ago, and it's called Light Sleep, and it has a list in it, and the list is a list of ephemera. You know, all the detritus of civilization, all the little things, like if you go up to your attic and open a box, you know, the things you'll find there. And if you save everything, like I do, you have movie tickets and little stubs and postcards and all kinds of photographs of people you don't know who they are anymore, and Christmas cards from people you don't remember, but you still save them. So this is, and there's something in here called a zoetrope And some of you may not know the zoetrope because it precedes movies. It was a drum, and you'd put pictures on the drum, and you put a slit, you'd view the drum, you'd spin it around and look through the slit. It would appear that the figures in the inside of the drum were moving, like birds were flying or horses were galloping or someone was riding a bicycle. Light sleep. In the library night, from the darkness of ink, on paper, there is a weeping heard book to book. From great catastrophe and the world of silence to the encyclopedia of ephemera, a history having to do with aerial leaflets, air raid papers, bills of mortality, birth certificates and blotting papers, child lost and found forms, donor cards, erratum slips, execution broadsides, liberally spattered with errors of all kinds, sold by vendors at public hangings. Funeralia with drawings of skeletons digging graves and inviting us to accompany the corpse of X to the church of Y. Gift coupons, greeting cards, housekeeping accounts, ice papers to place in windows for the delivery of blocks of ice, jury papers, keepsakes, lighthouse dues slips for all ships entering or leaving ports, marriage certificates, news bills, notices to quit, oaths, paper dolls, plague papers, playing cards, quack advertisements, ration papers, razor blade wrappers, reward posters, slave papers, songbooks, tax stamps, touring maps, union labels and vice cards left in telephone boxes, warrants and watch papers used to keep the movements of the pocket watches under repair free of dust, wills and testaments, xerography, and the zoetrope disc, also known as the wheel of life, wherein figures painted in a rotating drum are perceived to move faster and faster, whether dancing, flying, or living in the whirl of time. But they do not in fact move, any more than does the weeping of ink or the waking from history's dream. Resurrection, this is for Ingeborg Bachmann. Reading the last paragraphs of their lives, where they lived, how they came to the end. As with fallen snow in late spring, or as before dark, the black clouds adrift in a cloudless sky. In folds below snow, elk graze the remnants of an August fire in dread weather. Small white-breasted birds dip pine to pine. So her life after her death. The brave know they will not rise again, that no flesh will grow about them at judgment morning, that nothing of this is waiting. I am not brave. We have only to remember one bit of what we saw, and all will come back. And this is, thank you. This is Morning on the Island. I think you have a bit of this same development in California. But this one is an island in the Pacific Northwest. Morning on the Island. The lights across the water are the waking city. The water shimmers with imaginary fish. Not far from here lie the bones of conifers washed from the sea and piled by wind. Some mornings I walk upon them, bone to bone, as far as the lighthouse. A strange beetle has eaten most of the trees. It may have come here on the ships playing music in the harbor, or it was always here, a winged jewel, but in the past was kept still by the cold of a winter that no longer comes. There is an owl living in the firs behind us, but he is white, meant to be mistaken for snow, burdening a bough. They say he is the only owl remaining. I hear him at night, listening for the last of the mice, and asking who of no other owl. Thank you. This is called Harmalapy. Harmalapy is a Greek word. We don't have the equivalent of it. I like words where there are no equivalents. This one is beautiful sadness. A kind of sadness that you like, that you want. It begins with a word as small as the cry of Athena's owl. An ache in the cage of breath, as when we say, can hardly breathe. In sleep, we see our name on a stone, for instance. Or while walking in the rain among graves, we feel watched. Others are still coming into our lives. They come, they go out. Some speak quietly beside us on a bench near where koi swim. At night, there is a light sound of wings brushing the walls. Not now, is what it sounds like. Or two other words. But they are the same passerines as live in the stone eaves, as forage in the air toward night. To see them, one must not be looking. Sanctuary. Light peeled bell-like through the canopy, long ago, or seems so. Then the ghost of a deer and crows flapping through smoke. Animate a poultice for me of herbs and mud to suck the poison from the boil, and then she went into a mahogany coffin, as there were then. Mornings, horses cantered through ground fog, having broken loose. So I would go out for them, bridles in hand with no one awake. The closer I came to them, the further they moved away. Following them through the clouds is a journey I would make again. Okay, thank you. Okay. I'm going to close now with a poem that is dedicated to all of you who have survived cancer or illnesses such as that. It begins with an epigraph by a French resistance poet whom I really like a lot, René Char. It's J'ai rapporté du désespoir en panier ce petit mon amour, que n'a pu le trésor en osier. It's I carried from despair a basket so light, my love, that it could have been woven of willows. Poem is called What Comes. It's the last poem. To speak is not yet to have spoken. The not yet of a white realm of nothing left, neither for itself nor another. A no longer already there, along with the arrival of what has been. Light and the reverse of light. Terror as walking blind along the breaking sea, body in whom I lived. The not yet of death, darkening what it briefly illuminates. An unknown place, as between languages, back and forth, breath to breath, as a calm in the surround rises, fireflies in lindens, an ache of pine. You have yourself within you. Yourself. You have her, and there is nothing that cannot be seen. Open then to the coming of what comes. Thank you.